G'day everyone and welcome to the Trekzone Spotlight. Matt Miller with you. Today's guest is a New York Times best-selling author. He's written in the 24 Farscape and Star Trek universes. He's got an original series of books coming up over the next few years as well. One of the best books that I've read in a long time is Desperate Hours from him. His name, of course, is David Mack. He's live in New York. David, thanks for your time.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me on.
What got you started on this writing adventure?
Well, it's a very long story, and since we only have 30 minutes, I'll try to give you the condensed version. I pretty much wanted to be a writer since I was a kid. I took my first shots at trying to write for TV when I was still in high school. I called up an executive producer of a Canadian-produced TV show called You Can't Do That on TV, told him I wanted to write for his show, and instead of laughing me off the phone, he gave me the format of television script over the phone and let me submit scripts. None of them were accepted, but this persuaded my parents that I was serious about trying to break into the craft because I made multiple attempts despite having garnered rejections. And as a result, I was allowed to take screenwriting courses at the college level while I was still in high school. This set the stage for me to go to NYU Film School. When I first got there, I thought I wanted to be a director, and then I slowly figured out over the course of about 2 years that my temperament was better suited to being a writer. And so I shifted my focus into screenwriting, and this was around the time that Star Trek: The Next Generation and subsequently Star Trek Deep Space Nine had an open door policy for script submissions. So I submitted scripts to them and collected more rejections. And I finally broke through with the help of a good writing partner who had some connections at Deep Space Nine. That writing partner was John Ordover, who at the time was the editor in charge of Star Trek Fiction at Simon & Schuster. And together, since I had the screenwriting qualifications and he had the access, we made our first sales to TV around 1995. And we made 3 sales in a very short period of time. One of those led to our first sale becoming our first script assignment. Then I started doing publishing-related work in the Simon & Schuster office for John, things like research, reading, and finding reasons to reject manuscripts from the slush pile. I also did things like writing reference material for other authors. That eventually led to being asked to write supplemental material for a book that came up short. I pulled that gig off. That led to me being invited to write my own book, which became the Starfleet Survival Guide, first book I ever wrote. That led to me being invited to pitch stories to the Star Trek SCE, also known as Corps of Engineers, ebook series, which was a monthly series of novellas. They started around 2001, I believe. And I contributed to that, got some good critical notices, and that led in 2003 to me being invited to write my first pair of paperback novels for Star Trek, A Time to Kill and A Time to Heal, the latter of which became a USA Today bestseller. And I've been writing novels for Simon & Schuster and other publishers ever since. And in that time, I've written 27 Star Trek novels and a half dozen or so other novels for other franchises, as well as some original work. And I've hit the New York Times list a few times. I've hit the Locust bestseller list several times, I believe 25 times in the last 15 years. I've had 6 #1 Locust bestsellers. Yeah, my most recent Star Trek book, as I think you noted, was Star Trek Titan, Fortune of War. Before that was Star Trek Discovery, Desperate Hours. And I had 3 Star Trek books out in 2017, the first of which was Star Trek Section 31 Control. And now we're in 2018, and in just 11 days, on January 30th, I'll be releasing my next original novel, The Midnight Front, which is book 1 of my new Dark Arts series from Tor Books.
How does it compare writing original fiction to writing inside a massive universe that is Star Trek?
Well, there are some overlaps, and really they're just totally different animals, to be perfectly honest. When you're working in a shared universe, there are pretty strict bounds of where you can go, where you can't go. You have to adhere to continuity as it exists at the time you write the book. When you write an original novel, you've got a lot more freedom, usually. What's unusual about the book that I have coming out at the end of the month, The Midnight Front, is that although it's an epic fantasy and a war epic set in World War II, it's secret history, not alternate history. The difference there is that in alternate history, an author can change the outcome of events both great and intimate, whereas with secret history, the premise is that the events being depicted took place either behind the scenes or parallel to the actual history that we know. Consequently, I am bound not to change the outcome of major historical events or to kill off historical personages who were known not to have died. In that respect, having spent so much time working in licensed fiction such as Star Trek, 24, Farscape, Wolverine, etc., prepared me well in that I was already used to the idea of coloring inside the lines and sticking to established facts. So when it came time to stick to the established facts of history for my Dark Arts series, it was something I already had a lot of practice with. So in that respect, I was able to bring over some of the skills I developed working as a media tie-in author to my work as an original author.
Do you find it's restrictive to as you say, colour within the lines, or is there still plenty of room to be creative?
There's tons of room to be creative. One of the misconceptions I've often encountered from fans of media tie-in work, particularly Star Trek, is that they feel that the more that is done in the books in terms of interlocking continuity, or the more that the shows establish new details in canon continuity, they feel that this uses up ideas, that this diminishes our ability to tell new stories, because it seems as if they're operating on the premise that there is a finite amount of story to be told. In fact, I have found the opposite to be true. The more developed and better executed a shared universe becomes, the more questions that get left unanswered by each story. For every question a story seems to answer, for every fact it seems to put into evidence, it tends to raise one or two questions. As a result, there are often many potential story seeds generated by every new idea, simply because there isn't time in an episode or even in every novel to get into the background of, well, why this? Well, why did this character do that? Well, where did this character find that thing that was important to the plot? Consequently, when, as a tie-in author, I ask myself those questions, let's say after viewing a new episode, what I often find is, hey, that could be a great jumping off point for a new story. So, in fact, I find that it's not really restrictive. And in terms of how that played into, let's say, The Midnight Front, although there were times that I wanted my characters to do things or I wanted events to turn out a certain way, and then I discovered that history just did not cooperate with that. In many ways, that forced me to go back to the drawing board and say, all right, what did happen? What can I use? Where can I go? And often I found solutions and I found inspirations that were better than what I had originally planned to do.
In terms of writing for established characters as opposed to characters that you've created, so like in the Discovery novel Desperate Hours, is there a different challenge in that, given that the characters have already been created and their personalities established on screen?
The challenges are a little bit similar, and there are key differences. Of course, when you're dealing with characters that have been created by someone else or by a team of writers, say in the case of Star Trek Discovery, the key is to find the core of the character. What is the character about? What is their major driving impulse? What are the major events of their personal history that inform their decisions? And beyond that, the other key thing to do as a tie-in writer is to say, what is this character's unique voice? How does this character express themselves, both verbally and non-verbally? How do they relate to different people? For instance, there's a practice known in psychology as code switching. It's also used in linguistics. It's a principle that says that the way we act with one person may not be the same way we act with another person. The way that I interact with my best friend is not necessarily the same way in which I will interact with my parents. It's not the same way I will interact with a prospective employer during a business interview. So part of what I have to do when I'm reading scripts and story material from, let's say, Star Trek Discovery, is I have to say, okay, let's say the character of Saru. He acts one way when he's dealing with Burnham, when they are verbally sparring. He behaves another way when he's addressing his captain. He has another mode that he goes into when he deals with subordinates. And there is yet another side of him that he keeps hidden away and which we only see expressed in private. And part of my job is to figure out what is the total picture of his psychology and then to depict him accurately in each setting and say, in this setting, dealing with this character, what elements of his personality are going to come to the fore? And I have to do that with every character. And in a way, that's also good practice. Again, when it came time to work on my original fiction, I was able to sit down and say, what will make each of my characters distinctive? What is different about the psychology of my main character as opposed to the supporting cast? What will make the way he deals with enemies, the way he deals with friends, the way he deals with allies? How is his speech pattern going to change? How is his mannerism going to change? And when you figure out the internal psychology, the mechanisms that make a character click, what drives them, what do they want, what are they afraid of, once you figure that out, it becomes easier to have a distinctive voice. Aside from just saying what's their speech pattern, does someone use contractions, is someone more likely to use Germanic terms as opposed to Latinate, I think that it's really just a matter of saying, what is this person's attitude going to be from scene to scene, from interaction to interaction. And it's really just a matter of figuring out what makes a character tick.
And I think you did that really well in Desperate Hours, which admittedly is actually only the first book of yours that I've read, but it's got me hooked. I'm already halfway through it in just under 2 weeks, which is an amazing feat for me because I haven't been reading many books, which I should be doing, but I am so excited to delve into your back catalogue now and read absolutely everything I can, because the thing that I really loved about Desperate Hours is that we don't have a lot of on-screen background on our characters, but you've perfectly encapsulated the way that I think the characters would act in other settings, on other missions, in terms of those regards. And as you said, the Burnham and Saru interactions, the interactions with Georgiou that we only got to see in the first 2 episodes. But then there were also, excuse me, the nice little tie-ins that are just one-sentence lines about the differences in the aesthetics between, say, the Shenzhou and the Enterprise. And that was a thought from Spock about the 2 different aesthetics and how it was such a human thing to do. Just those little touches, I think, make Desperate Hours a really cool book to read that I think everyone should pick up a copy.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Those touches that you referred to came out of discussions between myself, staff writer Kirsten Beyer, who is the media tie-in coordinator for Star Trek Discovery, the showrunners, my editor, and also the head of CBS licensing, which has to vet and approve all of these story details. I had a conundrum as I was writing the book and preparing the outline, which was to say, I was looking at all the production photography from Discovery, which is supposed to be set 10 years before the original series, and yet its aesthetics were very different. So I had to ask all of these various stakeholders in the process, which one am I supposed to stay faithful to? Do I describe the Enterprise and its interiors as if they look like the Shenzhou and its other vessels in Star Trek Discovery? Do I describe Shenzhou as if it fits into the original TOS universe despite what we see on screen? Or do I describe each as we know them and then try to reconcile the difference? The agreement was made at all levels. Try to find a way to reconcile the 2 if you can. And fortunately, that's something I'm very good at. I've had a lot of practice doing that over the last 15 or 16 years, and as a result, I've become quite adept at finding explanations for things that seem incongruous, but once you put them into a context, you go, oh, sure, okay, I could buy that.
And it's just purely the fact, as I said, it's just one sentence. There's no great long detail about it. It's just, this is the way that it is, and it works. It makes sense as well that and you can make a comparison to today's aircraft and warships and naval ships and that sort of thing, and it's very believable that those sort of things can happen. It's just really interesting to listen to you as well, David, that I know that I knew that there were other people involved in getting a book to print, but just to hear you list off the amount of people that had an involvement in the book, what's that like to deal with and wrangle all of these different thoughts and people coming on board to the story ideas?
Well, the Discovery novel was relatively unique in that regard. Because the show was new, and because I was writing the book before the show premiered, and the launch of the book was going to happen 2 days after the show's first 2 episodes were released, there was a real sense of need to make sure that all the pieces fit together. As a result, I had a lot of close contact with the writers' room, with the producers, the production staff. From day one, I was copied on all the scripts for Discovery. I saw all the production photography, set designs, schematics, costume designs. And it also helps that Kirsten Beyer, who was tapped to serve as the media tie-in coordinator for the show, happens to just be a very good friend of mine. We've known each other for a very long time. We're very close. And that made for a very easy and comfortable working relationship. It also helps that both the editors at my publisher, Simon & Schuster, and John Van Sitters, the head of licensing at CBS, who has to vet all of these sorts of licensed products, I'm also friends with all of them, and we also have a long-standing relationship that is based in trust and has matured over the years into genuine friendship. So that made it very easy to talk to everybody involved. It meant that there was a lot of trust on all sides. And it enabled me to not only receive input from the show, but to give some things back, to give notes, for instance, on the scripts that I received. And for instance, some of the characters that I named for the Shenzhou's bridge crew, those names and personality details ended up being carried forward by the producers for some of the characters who persist on the show, such as Helm Officer Kayla Detmer. Some of the characters you see on the Shenzhou in the pilot, like Troy Iannuzzi, whose last name was supposed to be pronounced Januzzi, but nobody there understood Italian pronunciation, so somehow it became Iannuzzi. They and many other characters originally had no names in the first several drafts of the pilot script. And as I was working on the book, I said, well, I can't just call them Helm Officer or Communications Officer. That's too esoteric, it's too dry, and nobody thinks of their coworkers like that. I need to give these people actual names, backstories, personalities. Can I have permission to do that? I was given that permission. I wrote up bios for several of those characters. They had to be approved by the show. And then as they started casting those roles, they asked me to modify some of my character descriptions to better match their casting. So I did that. And then some of my character one-sheets got given to the actors so that they would have that information in which to ground their performances. So there was a lot more give and take between myself and the show on this first book based on Discovery than a lot of first books based on other shows in the Star Trek canon have had. And I think that's partly just a function of the fact that the show wanted to work more closely with me. And I think it's also a product of the social media age where, with everything being online, a lot of the production processes have been moved online. A lot of the script distribution and art distribution channels are now handled electronically. It makes this sort of long-distance collaboration easier. And I think that the show did a marvelous job of taking advantage of those systems to help me create a book that feels like it really fits in their universe and expands on it while feeling pretty much like it.
Well, let's move on to the trilogy of books that you've got coming in, the original novels. It's the Dark Arts series, and The Midnight Front is the first one to come up, which is coming out in the next few days, as you said. Can you tell us a little bit about the plot of what's happening in the book?
Okay, The Midnight Front is a story set in World War II in the European theater. It's about a young man named Cade Martin, an American studying at Oxford. When the war breaks out, he and his family try to flee England, but the ship they are on is sunk by Nazis. But aside from just torpedoes, when they try to evacuate the ship in lifeboats, the lifeboats are attacked by a massive demon that comes out of the sea. Cade is nearly killed, and when he awakens from a coma about 16 months later, he finds out that he's been declared legally dead, and that the only way he can avenge his parents is by joining the Allies' top-secret black magic warfare initiative, the Midnight Front. And this group was created because the Nazis apparently have cultivated their own black magic warfare initiative, which is being run by a trio of very powerful black magicians, and they have a small army of amateur magicians who are referred to as dabblers. And the inspiration for that was the Thule Gesellschaft, which was an actual occult society which gave birth to the Nazi Party in the 30s. And then the premise of the book is that as Cade Martin and his allies in the Midnight Front wage their sort of desperate guerrilla black ops, black magic war against their Nazi counterparts, Cade has to learn first that revenge is a hollow motivation, an intrinsically selfish motivation, and he has to learn to grow beyond that, to learn what real heroism means and to learn what kind of sacrifice war really requires. And it's about his journey and the journey of his compatriots. And it's got a magic system which is based on the old 15th century grimoires. The premise is that all magic, from the smallest trick to the grandest miracle, is predicated on the conjuring and control of demons, which means it's very mechanical, it's very precise, almost scientific, and if you get it wrong, you end up dead. And then onto this very antiseptic style of magic, which I borrowed from history, I grafted on a new practice called yoking, in which magicians forcibly bind demons to their body and mind for as long as they can hold them, or perhaps for contractually bound times based on their pact with the demon. And for as long as they can hold the demon bound to themselves, they can wield that demon's special powers as if those powers were their own. So you bind a flame-throwing demon, and now you can throw flame from your hand, stuff like that. The problem is that holding a demon yoked in this manner is an absolutely miserable experience. It causes things like nightmares, migraine headaches, nosebleeds, diarrhea. It causes self-harm behavior like hair pulling, self-cutting. And in order to quell the torment caused by the demons in their heads, most magicians who practice yoking for battle magic wind up drinking heavily, using opiates, hallucinogens, chain smoking. They take on all manner of bad habits as a means of suppressing the psychological damage being inflicted by the demons in their psyches. So it's a magic system that has a real cost, a real sort of damage to the user, and it makes it both cinematic, but also very primal and very visceral.
Well, it sounds absolutely fantastic, and I cannot wait for it to come out. January 30th hits shelves, is that right?
That's correct. The Midnight Front arrives on shelves, I believe, in the United States and Canada on January 30th, 2018. I'm not sure of the specific release date for international markets. I'm sure Australia is on that market somewhere. There'll probably be import copies. I know that we've already done a deal for Czech rights. I believe it will be translated into other languages before long in Europe. I've already written book 2. Book 2 is titled The Iron Codex, and that's probably going to be released in January of 2019, so about a year from now. And I'm currently working on book 3, The Shadow Commission. What makes books 2 and 3 different, and what makes the Dark Arts series unique, is that with each book I jump into a different geopolitical era of 20th century history. And I'm also trying to have each book be a different kind of book. So whereas book 1 is a war epic that spans 6 years in Europe, Book 2 is a Cold War spy thriller that takes place over approximately 50 days in early 1954. And Book 3 is going to be a paranoid conspiracy piece that takes place right after the assassination of John F. Kennedy in November 1963. If the first 3 books sell well enough that Tor chooses to extend the series, my hope is that Book 4 might be a gritty murder mystery crime thriller set in 1970s New York. Book 5 might be a sleek corporate heist caper set in Los Angeles in the 80s. And then by the time we get to Book 6 in the 1990s, we might do something in the Balkanized, the Balkan states as they fracture apart into civil war.
Fantastic, David. Thank you so much for your time today. Everyone should be searching your name in all good bookstores and buying every single copy that you've ever written because you produce some fantastic novels, and I can't wait to check out your entire back catalogue.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure being on, and I hope that all of my readers who have enjoyed my work for Star Trek over the last 15 or so years will come with me on this new literary adventure. It would mean a lot to me if my Star Trek fans would take a chance on my non-Star Trek work and follow me into a whole new adventure.